So this evening, we're going to do something special tonight. We've been having one sutra per class per week. We're going to see maybe we're going to go through 5 or 6 tonight. That's the plan. We're going to look at different types of thought waves. What are the different thoughts in the mind? So first it says, yoga stills the waves of the mind. And when the mind is quiet or calm, we connect with the self inside. And when the mind is busy, we kind of attach to the thoughts. We identify with the thoughts. We're pulled away from our self. So what are these different thoughts? So in Sutra 5, it says there are 5 types of thought waves, some of which are painful and some of which are not. We can even say they're pleasant, right? So thoughts could be either pleasant or unpleasant. So a little example from Swami Vishnu. Learning may be both enjoyable and painful for the student. He wants knowledge, and yet he wants to escape. That's why we only sit for 10 minutes, so that it can hopefully be pleasant and not painful. But we want to, if you're sitting in a lecture for 2 hours, you want to be there, but at the same time, part of you wants to leave, but you also want to be there. And, it's hard. So it's fun to notice just the way the mind can have that little play. So what are these 5 kinds of thoughts? So the 5 kinds of thought waves are correct knowledge, erroneous understanding, verbal delusion, sleep, and memory. And we'll look at what each one of these is. So what is correct knowledge? So this is direct perception. So there's 3 ways actually to have correct knowledge. So one is direct perception. I eat an apple. So I know about that apple. I know what it tastes like. I see the color of it. So I understand the apple. On a deeper level, it's direct knowledge of understanding of self. But we could just say our senses see the apple clearly. So we know what the apple is. There's inference. So we can know something by using our intellect. If we see smoke behind the hill, we can think what's behind the hill. There's probably a fire there, right? So we can kind of understand things through seeing it in another way, through inferring what must be happening, right? You're walking down the streets in Montreal. If you live in Montreal now and you see the Canadiens logo everywhere, you infer it must be the playoffs. So, right, we can infer things. And then the other way to understand is, or have direct knowledge, is through a wise person telling it to us. So if there's a saint or a sage, maybe you run into Swami Shivananda on the bus, and he tells you something, you know that it is true. So these are the 3 ways to have correct knowledge. So through direct perception, we experience it, we know it, and then also through inferring it and through a wise person telling us about it. And even in these, it can be very interesting, right? Have you ever taken a bite of food after you've brushed your teeth? Do we get direct perception from our senses? No, it could taste awful, even though it's something we normally like because we have this toothpaste in our mouth. So, for it to be direct perception, we actually still have to be seeing clearly. We have to clear the fog out of our glasses. So we're actually seeing this situation because sometimes our senses, they can be not seeing clearly. We can just say it like that, like you have to taste the toothpaste in your mouth. After we look at all the different types of thoughts, we're going to see how to see clearly. And then, if we infer something, I took a course in university on yoga philosophy, and he had this example. If you see smoke, you can infer there's a fire. And I raised my hand, being the guy I am, and I was like, well, what if it's a smoke machine? But I was being very earnest about that. We don't know for sure it's a fire. But that proves our inference still has to be through a very clear mind. And then finally, if a wise person tells us something, then we know it's real. But even then, it could become painful. The mind gets in the way. I've had my teacher tell me the same thing. Usually it takes me 10 to 15 times over 2 to 3 years until I believe him. So even though a wise person is telling me, the doubts can still come up in the mind. So we still need to have the clear mind to understand this true knowledge that's in front of us. So that's one type of thought, is the correct knowledge. So let's look at the others now. So erroneous understanding is a false conception of an idea or object whose real nature does not conform to that concept. And we have the example we often see in yoga from Vedanta is the snake in the rope. Or we can think of mirage in the desert, right? You're in the desert, you think you see, a nice lagoon or something, but really it's just the sand. So the mind isn't seeing correctly. Or you walk outside and you see, at night, you see a snake. And then you shine a flashlight, the light of knowledge, and you see it's not a snake, it's a rope. So our mind kind of jumps to a conclusion because a snake looks a little like a rope, or a rope looks like a snake. So in this way, we can have erroneous understanding. But erroneous understanding is not always painful. It can also be pleasant. So seeing the snake and rope, that could be painful, right? We see the snake and we jump, right? We freak out. But another way, and one of my teachers, Srinivasan, he had this example, is, a murti. So we have these murtis, or statues, that represent the divine. So we have like a murti of Ganesha. You have a little statue of Ganesha, or maybe you have a big one, right? But then we superimpose that statue is Ganesha, but it's not. That is also erroneous understanding. But what we're doing is we're worshiping the idea of Ganesha through the murti, through the statue. So in that way, we're superimposing this idea or energy of Ganesha into the statue. So it helps us focus. And it's the same as superimposing the snake into the rope. But in this way, it's actually helping us. It's uplifting us. So it's kind of interesting that even erroneous understanding, if seen in a clear way, can be uplifting. So that is number 2. Number 3 is very practical. So Patanjali, he really saw like social media coming up. So the third form of thought is called verbal delusion. And this is caused by the identification with words that have no basis in reality. So we can call this fake news. We've heard this expression. So Patanjali Maharishi, a few thousand years ago, he saw the future, right? So sometimes we hear things that aren't real and we start to believe them. And it's such an interesting thing to just question. And when it's things that we that go against our beliefs, it's easy to question them. But sometimes things that go along with our beliefs, it's a little bit harder to question, right? Just a simple example, I used this past weekend. There was something came up on my Facebook feed, and it was the Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, and he was kind of slamming down the leader of the opposition. And so right now we have a more liberal government, and I'm more liberal leaning in many things, although I'm a little fiscally conservative. I think it's important to keep your budget. And this Prime Minister happens to be quite liberal, pro-environment, but he's also an economist. So it makes sense to me. And then you saw in this thing this way, he just tore up the leader of the opposition, like one thing after another, like bang, 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 and all these quotes right in the House of Commons. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And then I said, wait a minute, like this must be too good to be true. And sure enough, this didn't really happen. It was just created. But because it went along with what I liked, it was very easy to believe. So this verbal delusion, sometimes we see through it when we don't want to believe it, but that might be true. And sometimes we just go along with it because it goes along with our beliefs. So if you're here now and, we like yoga and all these things, then we hear about some magical yoga stories, this person, throw out medicine and just heal yourself. And sometimes we can, but other times, people are just making money using yoga as a way to do it. My teacher would joke, all you need is a fancy hat and then a magic feather. And you say, I'm going to give you a chakra massage. And you wave the feather and say, I'm massaging your 3rd chakra and your 4th chakra. And people will pay lots of money for that, even though you're not doing anything. So, we have to be wary. Try to see clearly, not to be excited by things just because they work with us, and not to doubt things just because they don't go with what we like or what we expect. So this is verbal delusion. And the mind likes to jump at this a lot. And we'll see next week how to work with it. See this? I'm selling next week by this week. Okay. So then after verbal delusion, the next one is called sleep. Maybe some of you experienced this during our meditation together. So there's a few ways, and I looked at some different translations and commentaries And I'll just stick with, Swami Vishnu talks about during deep sleep, the state of mind is blank. So in deep sleep, the mind is completely still, but we're not aware of it. And sometimes people say, well, the mind is still, so I am in samadhi, I'm enlightened now. But in the higher states of consciousness, the mind is still, but we're conscious of the stillness. We're aware. In deep sleep, the mind is still, but we're not aware of that stillness, right? And when we're sleeping and the mind isn't still, then it's going through the other ones. When we're dreaming and stuff, we have the other thoughts kind of coming up in my understanding. And then the last type of thought is memory. And this is the retention of past experiences. And of course, memory can be pleasant or pleasurable or painful as well. And we don't always remember things quite clearly. And sometimes we hide our memories to make them pleasant when they're unpleasant. And sometimes unpleasant experiences actually bring pleasure because we learn from them. So the memory can be delusional as well, and can even be tonight after this lecture. If I asked everyone, write to me, one sentence summary, right? Everyone might say something different, but then how are we all remembering it? We're remembering, our memory is based on what guna we're at in our mind. Is the mind peaceful? Is the mind busy? Is the mind dull? If the mind is tamasic, we'll look at the thing we like the least from the experience. If the mind is rajasic, we say, that's not for me because of this, and that's not for me because of that. I want this. If the mind is sattvic, maybe there's a glimmer of something that, we got a little understanding. So, even our memory can be a little bit clouded, and that's a tricky one. But memory is still important. When I talked about the knowledge of the apple, how do we know what an apple is? We remember from our experiences, and we hope that is a clear memory. So these are the different types of thoughts we can have. So we can see something clearly, understand it through our own sense experience, or through inferring, or through a wise person telling us about it. And then we have the incorrect understanding, like the snake in the rope. The verbal delusion, it's more from when we hear something, and that might be something untrue, or we don't process it properly when we hear it. Maybe that happens sometimes. Somebody tells you something and we take it the wrong way, right? That can be a verbal delusion as well, which can happen. And then we have the sleep and the memory. So these are the different types of thoughts, and they can all be pleasant or unpleasant. And how do we deal with them? Practice and dispassion. And that's what we'll talk about in our next session together next time. So now we've covered all the way up to Sutra 11. So you can, if you have a sutra book, you can read through that a little bit on your own as well. And maybe observe the mind this week. Notice, what are the thoughts I'm having? Is this something I really know, or I just think that it's true? Why do I think it's true? Where does it come from? And that kind of becomes a habit. And it's not to be an incredible skeptical about everything, but just to try to see a little bit more clearly so that the thoughts are more pleasant than unpleasant. So good to see everyone this evening, and have a wonderful night. Om Namah Shivaya.